Studies have found something that should make every retiree with a traditional IRA or 401k stop for a moment. About 84% of retirees at RMD age are taking only the bare minimum the IRS requires them to take. And among people who haven't reached RMD age yet, roughly 80% aren't withdrawing a single dollar from their retirement accounts. Now, at first, that sounds like the responsible thing to do. Why take money out if you don't need it? Why pay taxes today when you can leave your savings invested? And if the IRS tells you the minimum amount to withdraw, why not simply take exactly that amount and leave everything else alone? Here's the quiet problem. The IRS minimum was never designed to be a retirement spending plan. It was designed to determine how quickly the government requires taxes to come out of tax-deferred accounts. And when you treat that minimum like a safe spending target, you can accidentally create a very different problem. Taking too little during the years when you're healthiest and most active, allowing your tax-deferred balance to keep growing, and potentially facing larger forced withdrawals later in life. So if you've been thinking, I'm doing everything right because I'm only taking what the IRS requires, take a breath. You are not behind. You are not irresponsible. But there may be a better way to think about that money. Because the real question isn't simply, how much does the IRS make me take? It's, how much can I safely and intelligently use while I'm still able to enjoy it? Before we get into percentages, tax rules, and all the letters that make retirement accounts feel like alphabet soup, I want you to take a breath. If you have been sitting there thinking, maybe I should have understood all of this by now, please know this. You are not behind. Most people were never taught how required minimum distributions actually work. These are complicated rules, and even people who have been saving diligently for decades can feel confused when they first encounter them. So we're going to slow this down. You don't need to memorize every IRS rule today. You don't need to become a tax expert. And you certainly don't need to panic because you saw the words required minimum distribution on a statement. Instead, we're going to walk through this like we're sitting together at the kitchen table. First, we'll make sure you understand what an RMD actually is and which retirement accounts it applies to. Then we'll look at when these withdrawals begin because the starting ages and timing rules have changed, and this is where many retirees get confused. After that, we'll walk through how the RMD is calculated so the percentage doesn't feel like some mysterious number appearing out of nowhere. We'll also look at some account-specific details because an IRA doesn't always follow exactly the same rules as a 401k, and spouses have their own separate RMD responsibilities. Then we'll get to the part that I really want you to understand. The biggest mistake may not be missing an RMD deadline. It may be thinking the IRS minimum is the same thing as a retirement spending plan. That's where the go-go years, slow-go years, and no-go years come into the picture, and why taking only the minimum can sometimes mean you are saving your money for a stage of life when you may not want or need to spend as much. Finally, we'll connect RMDs to the things retirees actually care about: taxes, Social Security, and Medicare. So take another breath. We're going to take this one piece at a time. And by the end, you won't need to be afraid of the RMD letter sitting in your mailbox. You'll simply understand what it means and what questions you should be asking before you automatically take the minimum. Now let's slow down and make the rules simple. An RMD is a required minimum distribution. If you have money in certain tax-deferred retirement accounts, the government eventually requires you to start taking at least a minimum amount out each year.
Why?
Because when you contributed to accounts like a traditional IRA or a 401k, you generally received a tax break going in. Your money could then grow for years without being taxed. But that tax deferral isn't meant to continue forever. So eventually the IRS says, it's time to start taking some of that money out. RMD rules generally apply to traditional IRAs and rollover IRAs, as well as many employer retirement plans, including 401k, S403b, S457 plans, TSPs, SPIRAs, and simple IRAs. Inherited versions of these accounts have their own distribution rules and schedules. But here's an important distinction. Your own Roth IRA does not have lifetime RMDs, and beginning in 2024, Roth 401k and Roth 403b accounts generally no longer have RMDs for the original owner either. Inherited Roth accounts can still have distribution requirements, so don't assume every Roth account follows exactly the same rules. Now, let's talk about age. Under the newer rules, Many retirees today begin their RMDs in the year they turn 73. For people born in 1960 or later, the starting age is scheduled to move to 75. And this is where one surprisingly easy mistake can happen. In your first RMD year, you generally have a choice. You can take that first RMD by December 31st of the year you reach your starting age. Or you can delay that first RMD until April 1st of the following year. But delaying it does not make that first withdrawal disappear. The IRS still requires your second RMD by December 31st of that same following year. So you could suddenly have two RMDs landing in one calendar year. And that's important because two taxable distributions in 1 year can create a much larger income spike. That could potentially push you into a higher tax bracket, make more of your Social Security taxable, or increase what you pay in Medicare Part B and Part D premiums because of higher income. So remember this. An RMD is a minimum you are required to take, not a retirement plan you are required to follow blindly. And understanding exactly when that requirement begins is the first step toward making the money work for your retirement instead of simply reacting to an IRS deadline. Now, let's take another breath, because this is the part that sounds more complicated than it really is. Your RMD isn't a random percentage someone at your brokerage decides to give you. Each year, the calculation starts with your December 31st balance from the previous year. That balance is then divided by a life expectancy factor from an IRS table based on your age. The result is the minimum amount you're generally required to withdraw for that year. Think of it this way. Suppose your account had $1 million at the end of the previous year. At age 73, the IRS life expectancy factor is around 26.5. Divide $1 million by 26.5, and you're looking at roughly $37,700, or about 3.8% of the account. As you get older, that percentage generally increases. Around age 80, for example, the factor is about 20.2, which works out to roughly 5%. So the percentage isn't fixed at one number throughout retirement. It gradually rises as your age increases. And that matters for the question we started with. Can you really spend 7% of your retirement savings? The RMD rules themselves don't say. You can only spend the percentage they're requiring you to withdraw. The RMD is a minimum, not a maximum. You can take more than the required amount. The penalties are associated with taking less than what's required. But there's another number you need to know. For years, many people heard that failing to take an RMD could result in a 50% penalty on the amount you failed to withdraw. Under the newer rules, that penalty is generally 25%. And if you correct the mistake quickly and properly, it may be reduced to 10%, and in some circumstances the penalty can potentially be waived when the proper requirements are met. So if your required distribution were $40,000 and you fail to take it, this isn't a situation where you should simply give up because you think half of that money is automatically gone. There are correction rules. But here's the bigger lesson. Don't confuse the IRS calculation with a recommendation for how much you should spend. The IRS formula determines the minimum distribution. Your retirement plan should determine how much you actually need and want to use. Take another breath. Because next, we need to look at the account types, and that's where the rules start getting surprisingly different. Take another breath. This is where even careful retirees can get tangled up because not every retirement account follows the same RMD procedure. Let's start with IRAs. If you have multiple traditional IRAs, you generally calculate the RMD for each IRA separately. But here's the helpful part. You can generally add those RMD amounts together and take the total from one IRA or from any combination of your IRAs. So if you have 3 traditional IRAs, you don't necessarily have to take a separate withdrawal from all 3. There is some flexibility. Now compare that with 401(k)s. If you have 2 old 401(k)s from 2 different employers, you generally have to calculate and take the RMD separately from each plan. You can't usually say, I'll just take the total required amount from one 401(k) and have it count for both. The IRS generally wants each employer plan to satisfy its own RMD requirement. And 403(b) plans can have some special rules. Certain 403(b)s may allow RMDs to be aggregated more like IRAs, but that depends on the specific plan. So if you have a 403(b), this is one of those situations where checking your particular plan matters. Now, let's talk about spouses. This one is simple but incredibly important. Each spouse has their own RMD. Your RMD is based on your age and your account balances. Your spouse's RMD is based on their age and their account balances. You cannot simply take a large withdrawal from your IRA and say, that should cover both of us. It doesn't work that way. Each spouse has their own requirement. And then there's the still working exception. If you're still working when you reach RMD age, you may be able to delay RMDs from your current employer's 401k, provided the plan allows it and you own less than 5% of the company. But, and this is the part people miss, that exception generally does not apply to your traditional IRAs. And it doesn't automatically apply to old 401ks from previous employers either, unless they're handled under the applicable rules, such as being rolled into your current employer's plan when permitted. So don't hear I'm still working and assume I don't have to take any RMDs. That can be a very expensive misunderstanding. The safest takeaway is this. Before you take, or don't take, an RMD, identify exactly which account you're dealing with, because the account type can change the rules. Now take another breath here because this next part is not really about an IRS rule. It is about your life. One reason taking only the minimum RMD feels so safe is simple. You get to leave the rest of the money untouched. More money stays in the account. More money keeps growing. And psychologically, that feels responsible. But retirement spending does not usually happen in a straight line. Think about your retirement in 3 stages. The first is the go-go years. These are often your early retirement years, when you may have the energy to travel, visit family, take on hobbies, spoil the grandkids, and finally, do some of the things you spent decades postponing. Then come the slow-go years. You may still enjoy life, but you often spend differently. You travel less. You stay closer to home. The big adventures may become smaller ones. And finally come the no-go years, when spending can change again. Not necessarily because you suddenly want more vacations, but because healthcare, assistance, and long-term care may become bigger concerns. That is sometimes described as the retirement spending smile. Higher spending in the active years, lower spending in the slower years, then potentially higher costs again later. So here is the emotional mistake. You spend your healthiest, most flexible years taking only what the government forces you to take because you are terrified of running out of money. Meanwhile, you may reach your late 70s or 80s with a larger account balance, but fewer things you can physically do with it. Now, I am not saying you should start draining your retirement accounts or spend recklessly. Absolutely not. I am saying the minimum should not automatically become your retirement plan. Because the goal of retirement is not to die with the largest possible statement balance. The goal is to use your money wisely across all 3 stages of your life. Sometimes, the best use of a retirement dollar is not leaving it untouched until the IRS forces it out. Sometimes it is using that dollar, carefully, intentionally, while you still have the health and freedom to enjoy what you spent your whole working life saving for. And in the next section, we need to talk about what happens when those RMD dollars collide with another major part of retirement, your Social Security and Medicare costs. Now take another breath, because this is where the RMD mistake can become more expensive than most people realize. An RMD is not just a withdrawal. That money can create a ripple effect. It starts with your required minimum distribution. When that money comes out of your traditional retirement account, it can increase your income for the year. And that higher income can then affect something called your provisional income. Why does that matter? Because provisional income is part of the calculation used to determine whether and how much of your Social Security becomes taxable. So the chain can look like this. RMD goes up. Then your provisional income goes up. Then more of your Social Security may become taxable. And the ripple may not stop there. If your income rises high enough, it can also affect Medicare through something called IRMA, the Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. That means a larger RMD can potentially create higher taxable income, cause more of your Social Security to become taxable, and increase what you pay for Medicare. Now, take a breath here. That does not mean every RMD automatically causes all of these things to happen. And it does not mean you should panic or try to avoid taking the RMD you are legally required to take. The point is simply this: retirement income decisions do not happen in separate boxes. Your IRA does not live in one box while Social Security lives in another and Medicare lives somewhere else. They can affect one another. That is why taking the minimum every year without looking at the bigger picture can be just as short-sighted as spending too much. The real question is not, how do I avoid taking money out? And it is not, how do I take only the minimum forever? The better question is, how do I coordinate my retirement income so one decision does not quietly make three other things more expensive? Because by the time the RMD arrives, some of your best planning opportunities may already be behind you. And that brings us to the most important part of this entire conversation, the planning tools you can use to create more flexibility before the government starts telling you how much money must come out. Now, take one final breath here. The goal of this video is not to make you afraid of RMDs. RMDs are simply a rule you need to plan around. And if you are watching this before your required distributions begin, you may still have several tools available to create more flexibility. The first is Roth conversions. In the years before RMDs begin, some retirees may have an opportunity to move portions of traditional retirement money into a Roth IRA and pay taxes before future required distributions are added to the picture. The second tool is delaying Social Security. For some retirees, delaying Social Security can create more control over when another major income source begins. That may provide a planning window where withdrawals and taxes can be coordinated more carefully. The third is a qualified charitable distribution, often called a QCD. If charitable giving is already part of your life, a QCD can be another tool worth discussing as part of your RMD strategy. And then there are annuities. For some people, an annuity may help create a more predictable income floor, reducing the pressure to make every retirement withdrawal decision from scratch. Notice what I am saying and what I am not saying. I am not telling you that everyone should do Roth conversions. I am not saying everyone should delay Social Security. I am not saying everyone needs a QCD or an annuity. These are tools. And the right tool depends on your income, taxes, retirement accounts, spending needs, charitable goals, and the life you actually want to live. So here is your homework. Tonight, sit down at your kitchen table with a notebook. Write down 4 things. First, when will your RMDs begin? Second, how much of your retirement money is in accounts that may eventually produce RMDs? Third, what other income will you have at that time, especially Social Security? And fourth, what do you want your money to do for you during your go-go, slow-go, and no-go years? Do not try to solve everything tonight. Just get clear, because clarity is where good retirement planning starts. And if this video helped you understand that the minimum RMD is not automatically the best retirement strategy, subscribe for more plain English conversations about retirement income, taxes, Social Security, and the decisions that can quietly shape your future. Take your time, ask the right questions, and build a plan around your life, not just the minimum the government requires.